Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. We are so excited to have you here and so excited for the direction that things are going. We normally update you on the COVID and EUA news, and we promised we would keep doing that even as we switched from the title COVID Connect to MedTech Crossroads. Today, last time we looked, there were no new EUAs out there. That's not to say that people are not still working on them. There are still some going through. And in fact, we're going to talk to later today after we talk with our guests is a little bit about the benefit risk framework that FDA's had in place since 2016, which actually enabled them to have a pretty good foundation for dealing with this. And I think it's going to become something that people think about, this interactive dialogue with the agency in emergent situations. It's just come to everyone's awareness. So it's definitely not gone away, but a little quiet on the EUA front. No new emergency use authorizations today. And so we are going to go right to our special guests today. Today I'm first joined by Gary Kendra. Hi, Gary.
Morning, or good afternoon, Dean. How are you?
Yeah, it's good to see you. Gary Kendra from Kendra Law Firm. Gary's a business and corporate attorney and has been general counsel for quite a few MedTech companies, one of which we were both at together many years ago, which was HandyLab Incorporated, a Becton Dickinson sale spinning out of U of M. And Gary has just seen so much over the years in the local startup community and business community, and that from the position of general counsel for many companies. And I thought it'd be really fun to have Gary on because you haven't been, you and I were talking to Gary and it was like, well, we're two people who didn't actually get a vacation when this whole COVID thing happened. Your clients have been really busy and you've been wrestling through many things with them. And I thought maybe we could just start out today to have you tell us a little bit about how did the whole COVID thing hit you and your clients when it first broke? What were the first things you guys were dealing with?
Yeah, thanks, Gene. We were talking a little bit before the call about the timeline. The first thing I noted is my last haircut was around February 28th, and I haven't been able to go back since, but that's on the horizon. But it was March 10th of 2020, about 3 months ago, the first 2 cases of COVID were reported. And then within 2 weeks, we were shut down totally as a state, except for non-essential businesses. And I think from what I've seen from a corporate lawyer perspective with my clients is there's been really 4 phases of COVID activity. And the first, I think, caught everybody by surprise because we knew it was getting bad, but didn't expect total lockdown. But the first set of questions were, hey, we're closed, it's essential versus non-essential workers, can I open my business? And in the MedTech space, it was particularly confusing for laboratory operations. Can I conduct my lab? Can I conduct my experiments? We had rules in where we could go in, preserve our assets, but unlike some states, we had no carte blanche authorization to open labs. So I think phase 1 was, can I open? What can I do? If I have somebody working on an experiment, can they work on other things? Because in terms of lab work, it came out to be COVID only, and then the whole essential, non-essential distinction. What I would call phase 2 was, oh my gosh, we're closed. What do we do now? This is when the EIDL and the PPP loans came out, and we were doing a lot of consulting on whether somebody is eligible for PPP, how do they apply? We saw success with the smaller banks and less success with the bigger banks. And then there were questions on impacts on grants, for example, and what's going to happen with our grant? Do we have to meet our milestones? What are the extensions going to be? Phase 3, which I think we're at now, is can I open and when? And then what we're seeing now is a lot of employee issues in terms of rehiring employees. Still pretty pervasive fear about employees wanting to come back to work or not wanting to come back to work, and whether it's a safe environment. And then what I think we're going to see going forward for the next indefinite period is, okay, now I'm going to reopen. How do I open my business safely? And what type of liability do I have if somebody alleges that they got infected at my premises? So we've been very busy really advising on new issues. And although the COVID hit everybody, Certain businesses were impacted disproportionately, and they'll have a very tough time coming back. And then other businesses will be able to weather the storm, but it's going to be a new normal as we move forward.
Yeah, and that's particularly hard for I think startups that weren't directly involved with COVID, and we're also familiar with the fabled burn rate that a company has, and the milestones you have to hit, and what's happening, and then all of a sudden here you are. Oh, let's just take 3 months off. And I remember we had Invest Detroit on early on, because I know they had tried to do a stopgap measure to try to provide some funding for companies that were sort of in between there. They wouldn't qualify for a PPP because of the type of business they were running. How did that hit startup companies that weren't directly working on COVID? I'm thinking of like venture funded companies and stuff.
Yeah, I think, clearly with venture funded companies, most of them are driven by milestones, and those milestones are driven by timing. And I think it really forced a reset where people had to examine their cash burn and see how long they could last, and talk to their investors and keep their investors in the loop. I think it was particularly difficult for companies that are in the process of funding, because in a sense, the rules of the game have changed. If you're working with your investors, your hope and expectation would be that we're not punished by the COVID virus. But I think what we're starting to see on the funding side is that money is getting tighter, and the deal you would have had in January is not the deal now. And maybe if you're doing convertible debt, that's going to be a bigger discount rate, maybe some warrants on top of it. If you're in we're seeing a lot more warrant activity, but I think the funding is going to tighten up. And this is kind of what happened in the 2008 recession for people who were around. The stock market crashed, the funding tightened up because investors got more conservative. So the funding terms got a little tougher. And I think that's going to be the case going forward. Investors can be more selective and more aggressive in their terms.
That's, it's really interesting. That's something I want to dig into in just a minute with you a little bit. And I think our audience would be interested to understand, we'll get there in a second, what typical deal structures look like and how that's changing. We might need to unpack a few of those terms too for folks. I guess before we go to deal structure, let me take you back to the whole reopening question though, because what have you seen? You mentioned there's the question of safety, the question of liability. I know we've also noticed this whole thing in certain industries, maybe not the startups so much, but there's certain industries where some folks are making the very rational decision. I can make more on unemployment than I can going back to work. Seems like a good deal. What are you seeing in this whole reopening puzzle?
I think that kind of depends on the business. I think for the smaller employers, the under 20 employers, everybody is really critical. So as we try to bring people back, we want to create a safe environment, but now we have family issues layered on top of it. We have people who have concern, and sometimes rightfully, about the safety of the environment, given that the COVID is still prevalent. And then through the unemployment and enhanced unemployment, we have a situation right now where people could make sometimes significantly more on unemployment with the federal enhancement than they can than they would have with regular employment, and maybe in some cases higher than their wage. So in Michigan, if you were eligible for the full unemployment, that's $362 a week, with the $600 a week federal layered on top of it. People are collecting $962 a week in unemployment. So that's about a $50,000 a year average. Now that train is going to run out at the end of July unless it gets extended. But for some businesses, the last couple of months that has played on it. But I think more so is, the prevalence of concern about safety and going back. And kind of how the rules are flushing out is, if I have a job available and I offer that job back because I put somebody on furlough and they don't accept the job unless there's specific reasons, they're infected with COVID, they came in contact with somebody who's infected with COVID, that's not a legitimate, I'm afraid to go back to work, it's not a legitimate excuse to not go back to work. So employers are put in a position where they have employees who don't want to come back for a variety of reasons. They have to fill that slot. And it's not really fair for a small employer to try to hire somebody to say, hey, I could keep you on board and I'm going to hire you. But when Gene wants to come back to work, I got to give him his job back because he's had a long history with us. So I think that's some of the tension. I think the other thing we're seeing is, nobody's going to say, I don't want to go back to work because I'm afraid, because that's not going to cut it under any circumstance. And their risk is that all of their unemployment is ultimately going to be cut off. I think what we're going to see more and more is people saying, I don't want to come back to work because I was there and people were commingling and they were social distancing and nobody's wiping off the common areas repeatedly. So I think there's going to be a lot of employment activity and probably a lot of employment litigation over the next several months and maybe longer as we try to bring people back to work and engage. But there clearly is this tension about people who aren't comfortable coming back yet. Some of it economically motivated, some of it is sincere, belief that it's not safe to go anywhere or to go back to work, certainly. And I think for our smaller businesses, that's really what we're going to be, getting our arms around and struggling with the next few months.
Yeah. And what did you see? Oh, I should mention here too, I just want to let everyone know that Gary's going to be available to answer a few questions at the end of our session. So queue those questions up. You can type them into the chat. You can raise a hand even now. We'll get to you when the time comes. I just want to let you know, business, corporate stuff and startups especially. I'd love to hear your questions. What have you been able to work through? So that's sort of the long-term re-engaging with work. What have you been able to work through on sort of the short term? Because I know you mentioned like laboratories and stuff like that and folks who might have some COVID relations, but that's not their whole business. How have you helped them navigate that, getting back even before the full opening? How does that look?
Well, I think a lot of it was again really winding down, preserving cash. People were forced to work at home. The laboratory situation was a bit ironic because most labs are safe. They have the PPE, they have the HEPA filters, they have the hoods. Naturally, it's an environment where you can't have a lot of contamination, but it was pretty carte blanche of how it worked. So, one of the things we're really encouraging and people to focus on now as we start to re-engage is having procedures in place and really documenting quite strongly of what you're doing. Because what we've seen through this whole epidemic is there's a lot of second guessing and all kinds of different parts. And so to really document what you've been doing. So for example, as employees are coming back, I'm encouraging use of a questionnaire similar to what the Big Three are doing. Have you been in contact with anybody with COVID? Are you sick yourself? Do you have a temperature? Maybe a temperature check to go onto it. And one business I'm involved with, we have a card that we force every employee to fill out every day and keep with their time card. So putting in procedures that show we're safe in terms of getting employees just to come into the workplace. And then a lot of it is going to be documenting procedures that are going to be unique to your business as to here's the steps that we're making to keep people safe. It would be very difficult in a litigation environment, in a lot of cases anyway, to say, hey, I got COVID at N2P when I was visiting there, because a good attorney is going to depose somebody and find out that they visited a whole bunch of places. But if I'm in a place where there's clearly been community spread within the work environment and 20 people got sick, it wasn't just me, then that causation burden that you always have in litigation, it's going to be a little bit easier to overcome than it might otherwise. But I really think the big takeaway is document your procedures, see what others are doing in your industry. And for the time being, we have to be very sensitive to what our best practices or perceived best practices, because we don't know if they work or not. But the perceived best practices, we have to follow those and document that behavior, because they say right now the courts are primarily closed. But when things open up, I think we're going to see a lot of litigation in a lot of different areas coming from COVID.
A lot of that coming back. Yeah, I think one of the things we've just sort of encouraged within our own organization is just slow down, take the time, be a little more conservative about how we approach this and a little more caring for others. And it feels like a lot of that with a little bit of documentation would go a long ways.
And there's still timing issues. So for example, we're allowed to have office workers back but encouraged not to. And I think as a lot of people on the call probably found out, some people are very good at working at home and others, they have 2 family members working at home, a dog and a kid in the background, and productivity stifles. So I think one of the challenges for businesses is going to be, there's a lot of interest in work at home more, But as a practical matter, do you use that productivity when you don't have the interaction with your colleagues, the ability to walk next door and bounce a question off? I just personally find that, phone calls and webinars and Zoom is great, but for certain things, face-to-face is much better. And we've kind of seen this transition on the business side, where we used to do all negotiations would be sitting at the table, the proverbial smoke-filled room, and back in the day, they were smoke-filled. And we kind of went over now to more conference call negotiations and even client interface. There's less interface with clients and people on the other side of a deal. And that really does have an impact on the dynamic of how people interact and how they negotiate deals and how they get stuff done.
Well, and to that end, I think this would be really interesting for our audience and also in terms of the purpose for why this community tends to gather. And you've had a front row seat for years and years and years for it, Gary. The deals that happen, there's probably a lot of terms that our audience doesn't necessarily understand. So maybe you could walk us through just for a few minutes, if you can characterize some, if there is typical, right? Typical deal structure or parameters. You mentioned things like warrants that are becoming more and more common. Previously and now, if we're seeing this sort of recession direction post-COVID, when you're in these negotiations that are now virtual and not in person, what did they look like previously? What were some typical trends, and now what are we seeing post-COVID?
Well, to take a typical startup from inception, usually what happens is we have a group of founders, inventive, scientific, maybe some business people, sometimes a lone ranger, but somebody has an idea or an invention they're trying to commercialize. So step one is usually structuring the relationships between the individual founders and what they're going to look like. And then if people aren't putting in their own money, then somewhere we have to find other people's money. And almost everything in MedTech, because of the cost, invariably is going to involve other people's money. So one path that we go down, or a lot of our companies go down, is the grant path. So we go down and we try to get SBR, NIH grants, different things that fit within our wheelhouse. And those take time and they're hit and miss. And a lot of times I encourage companies to do that simultaneously with trying to do a fundraising. If you're going to do a fundraising, then you're going to put together a slide deck typically and go out and try to garner interest in your product or your technology. And so our first set of funding is typically what we call a convertible debt instrument. Dean, you want to put $100,000 into my company. I think we're worth $1 million. You should get 10%. And you think we're worth $200,000 and should get 50%. So you want to invest and I want to take your money, but bridging that gap of what we think the value is when it's very new, maybe it's only IP or prototype or very early stage, a lot of times it's difficult to bridge that gap. So you want to invest, I want to take your money. A typical structure is I give you what's called a convertible note. So I have a promissory note where I'm going to pay you back, but the intention isn't that I will pay you back. The intention is when we get to what we call a price round of funding, further on down the line where the investor is going to negotiate per share price, we've kicked that down the line, but your note will convert on that price funding. And typically that has a discount where, say 15, 20% discount. If the new investor is buying shares for $1, you're going to convert your note at 80 cents a share. So you have a built-in rate of return on your convertible note. And then once you get beyond convertible notes, you get into price rounds of funding. A Series seed funding would be typically your first round. And there you negotiate with your investor. And so kind of what we're seeing, and typically, probably 20% with a 6%, 20% discount with a 6 to 8% interest rate would be pretty typical for a note that we've seen pre-COVID, but now the cost of money is getting higher. So one way the investor satisfies that is they will want a higher discount. If the new investor is paying $1 a share, I took a bigger risk, I want to pay 70 cents a share. Or maybe I'll get what's called warrants, which is like an option to purchase stock. Hey, I'm gonna get a note with my discount, but I'll get 10,000 warrants at a penny a share that I could convert to stock later on. So when I see the deal terms are getting a little more aggressive, money is always tight and it's always difficult to raise money. But now I think that's going to be enhanced in the immediate environment just because of all the economic effects of COVID. So it's always going to be a struggle as we move forward for the investor. I'm sorry, for the company, if you don't take the money, then you're either going to hang on for a while, find it somewhere else, or you're going to tank. So in many cases, my philosophy is someone's going to write a check, figure out a way to take it, and it's just going to be more expensive money as we move forward.
So this isn't the whole procedure changes or anything. This is just a matter of be aware that the price of money is going up, and that the deal terms are going to get tighter. It's not
I think that's correct. I think the instruments we typically use, convertible notes and preferred classes of preferred stock and the like, I don't think the nature of the instrument's going to change, but I think the sweeteners to bring in investors are going to be more paramount as we move forward trying to raise funding.
That's great. I do see one hand raised here. Ken Spencer's got his hand up. I hope that's for a question for Gary here. Ken, you're on.
Thanks. Hey, Gary, have you seen an increase or a decrease in putting a cap on convertible notes?
Yeah, I know a cap on a convertible note is when I convert my note, I'm going to convert typically at the value of the next round of funding. So if my negotiated pre-money value of the next round of funding is $20 million, that's going to dictate the waterfall, what we call, or how the money comes through to the investors. And what a cap does, it says, we don't care what your next round of funding is at. We're going to convert as if your funding raise was the cap amount. So say I'm going out and I have a $20 million investment I'm negotiating with my investors. I may have a $10 million cap, and the result is the note holders who convert are going to get more shares on that conversion. But yeah, a lot of times from the company standpoint, you're not in favor of a cap, or you try to avoid a cap and just stick with your pure discount. But I think, Ken, we are seeing more caps being negotiated in convertible notes, where at least in a lot of the codes, I thought you saw that a lot, but in Michigan, much more aggressive on caps, and I think that'll continue.
Great question. Thanks for that, Ken. Let's just check here. Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand, type it into the chat box. I appreciate Ken's question. Not a happy subject necessarily, but pivots and closures. What do you see? So the funding is tighter. COVID has hit. Yeah. We've all had to take a break for 3 months. It's worked better for some than for others. Are you seeing anything yet in the pivot and closure world?
Yeah, I think we saw some companies that were pivoting to COVID solutions because they have capabilities in different areas, and that's an area that you have to be very cautious of, because there tends to be a tendency to chase the low-hanging fruit or the perceived low-hanging fruit. So some companies were pivoting, saying, hey, our technology is adaptable for COVID, and if that's going to garner some immediate revenue opportunities, that may make sense. But you have to keep your eye on the focus and eye on the prize of what you were set up for. And very few or zero companies were set up for COVID, so it's so new. So that pivoting becomes a challenge. Cutting cash burn, laying off people, perhaps going dormant are solutions until the market stabilizes a little bit. But we've also seen a lot of companies that just aren't going to make it over the hump. And we're talking about bankruptcy and asset protection from creditors. One example, I represent a limousine company, and it was a fellow who spent 10 years building up the business, and he's up to 6 limousines. He financed them, and that had personal guarantees. He had some MetroCard type vehicles for airport runs, and he had party buses for weddings and concerts. So his entire business is built on 10 to 20 people sitting in an automobile, and that's not happening anytime soon. And so because he was the guarantor on the vehicle leases, we talked about not so much a bankruptcy now, but looking at your personal assets and looking at what kind of things that we could do so his whole life savings doesn't get torn down. Ordinarily, when you operate a business, just like owning stock in Ford Motor Company, if I own stock in Into Being, I'm not responsible for Into Being's debts. If the company goes bankrupt, then I don't have any personal liability. My loss is limited to my investment. But in many cases, with real estate, for example, loans, credit cards, SBA loans even, you're a personal guarantor on that. And if your business goes down, you haven't just lost your investment, you've lost potentially all of your life savings tied around that. So the pivot in those cases is, how can I get assets out of my name and protect them and not have them clawed back later on in a bankruptcy for some type of fraudulent transfer. I can't get rid of my assets and just give them to someone else because I'm getting sued or getting sued on a guarantee. I think with a lot of businesses where we're going to see that is the leases in particular. I think a lot of landlords have been pretty generous, and even finance companies, in giving forbearance on lease payments, but that's not going to last forever. And it'll be interesting to see if people get real aggressive on enforcing personal guarantees on businesses that ended up going out of business because of COVID.
We have a question here from Olaf, who's a longtime participant in our things about the use of federal funding. And Olaf, your line is live if you want to ask your question live.
Yeah, hi. Gary, thank you for your explanations. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right. I'll need a haircut too soon anyways. But, so I was wondering, in April and May, after the, what was it called? Was that the Heroes?
The CARES Act.
The CARES
Yes.
Act, that's right.
Yes.
The CARES Act came through. And there was a lot of funding for small and medium-sized businesses associated with that. And then we heard a lot of abuse about that by larger corporations, even academia, allegedly. And now this has become quiet and settled down. And the most recent thing I'd heard is that there was still quite a lot of money available, but companies found it difficult to access that. What do you know about this right now? And I know that this is more about keeping businesses running rather than, innovation and bringing new products to market.
No, and those are the kind of things that we've been dealing at. The CARES Act came out, and some companies that probably didn't need or deserve the money got very effective, notably the Los Angeles Lakers. So there was a whole slew of regulations that came out that we called the Laker effect, because we had companies that really weren't intended to get this money, and they ended up getting it, and then they tightened up the CARES rules considerably. But the idea behind the CARES Act initially was you're going to retain your employees. We're going to give you funds based on a percentage of your payroll. And as long as you use 75% of that money for wage, you have 25% free rent, utilities, other things within an 8-week time frame, then you don't have to pay that money back. If you do have to pay it back, it's a 1% interest rate. So it was very attractive for businesses, but what became very apparent, particularly in Michigan, is if I got CARES Act money and I had 8 weeks to spend it on employment, there's no way I could do that because I'm closed. And even if I was open, or even if I wanted to bring employees back to use my CARES Act funds, I'm telling an employee, look, you're going to come back to work and I'm going to use this CARES Act money. I'm going to pay you your wage. Well, we had a lot of employees that said, no, I'm making more on unemployment. You're forcing me back to work. I can't work and I'm taking a pay cut. So in the last week or so, and it's still being amended, but they're relaxing the rules in terms of when you want to spend when you could spend the CARES Act money. My understanding is that money is still available, and it still always is intended at employee retention. And the experience has been the big banks were supporting their big clients. So if you were a big company at Chase, you might have got millions of dollars. If you were a small company at Chase looking for $10,000 or $20,000, it was much harder to do. Yeah. But I believe the first tranche of CARES Act money got absorbed very quickly. I believe it's still available, and you should be talking to, like the banks of Ann Arbor, the Huntington Bank, Huron Valley. The local banks have been much more helpful in supporting their communities and getting CARES Act money through. If you are eligible to get it, it still has to be used for paying wage primarily. But the time period for doing that now has been extended 24 weeks from receipt of the loan instead of the 8, which was very difficult. And then there's still some technical changes going on, because to use that money, you're required to bring back essentially all of your full-time employees over some period of time. And some businesses, a restaurant operating at 50% capacity is not going to be able to bring back all its employees. So there's still some massaging going on there, but that's some of the things we encourage. I think the other thing we saw was a lot of different state programs or local programs. Hey, there's $10 million, for this type of company, and you could get up to 50,000 each. Well, if you do the math on that, that's 20 companies that could get that money out of thousands and thousands of companies who were impacted. So some of those other programs, while nice and generous, I was kind of telling clients, go buy a lottery ticket because you're probably about the same odds of getting funded as a program with thousands of people, applying for 20 funding opportunities.
That's great. Appreciate that.
But
And Olaf,
they thread the needle now as the economy reopens, but it's still threading a needle, like you say.
Yeah, but to the extent CARES Act funds are there, I would go for it. And I think we are going to see another tranche of funding come through. Unfortunately, everything has got caught up in a political quagmire. We would have hoped that a pandemic wouldn't be politicized, but it has, and there's more money there that is being held up. I don't know that there's going to be a lot more money for businesses coming out of this. I think it's going to be more of a wait and see. But a lot of that money that is still available out there, people are encouraged to do it, particularly with the rules loosening up. And I think they did a disservice not looking at the types of companies eligible for that. A company with 500 employees and $20 million of revenue is not in the same position as someone with 5 or 10 employees that really needs that money to stay alive.
yeah, great. Olaf, thank you for your question. Appreciate it, sir. Hey, Gary, thank you for taking this time with us today. I just want you to give us a quick rundown of your areas of practice. I think it's obvious to anybody who is listening to you that you're not just a guy who files the forms, right? You've lived this many times over with so many companies. Can you just give us a quick rundown of your business and areas of practice?
Sure. I started off in the late 80s, practicing all corporate law. A lot of the early work that I did in my career was mergers and acquisitions. Did a lot of work at Domino's Farms and for Thomas S. Monahan Inc. So people around back in the 80s, anything Tom Monahan bought, our firm had a finger on. In the mid 90s, anything he sold, we had a finger on. And then I started gravitating toward more of a tech practice, spent a couple of years at Jaffe Rate, now in Southfield in their technology commercialization group. And in 2000 thereabouts, we took an Ann Arbor company called Genomic Solutions Public. So we did an IPO. I worked on their IPO and went in-house as EVP and General Counsel. And that was sold in 2002 or 3, and I've been on my own since. A lot of what I like to do is in the science area and really commercialization of university inventions, commercialization of different science activities. But really, it's a broad-based technology commercialization practice with a focus on licensing, financing, and really inception to exit corporate representation.
Well, that's great. We really appreciate your coming on today, and we love the times that we've gotten to work together in various capacities. Love working with you and Ashley, and so just thank you so much for being.
Thanks for the time. Thanks for the opportunity.
Being on.
Everybody well.
Wants to reach out to Gary at Kendra Law, please do. He's a fixture in the local biotech medtech community. So thanks for being here, Gary. Well, that's awesome. Gary is a wealth of knowledge, and we appreciate having him on. I'm sure at some point we'll ask him to come back and give us another update as time passes. Next up, I want to welcome Michelle Larkin from the University of Michigan's Fast Forward Medical Innovation Program to the show. There's Michelle. How are you doing, Michelle?
Doing great. Thanks, Gene, for having me on today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We see you are actually back in the office for the first time in a while, right?
Yes, the office has power and my house does not. So
oh, no. That was pretty wide-ranging power outages.
Don't tell anyone I'm here, though.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry.
Just kidding.
So someone might figure out though if they watch the video. No, we appreciate having you here, Michelle. Michelle is the Director of Commercialization Programs at Fast Forward Medical Innovation at University of Michigan, and you've been around a lot of these programs as well as working with spin-out companies coming out of U of M. And I just thought it'd be really cool to have you on to tell us a little bit about how FFMI, what FFMI is, because some of our audience will not know.
Sure.
What some of the current programs you're running, because there's a free webinar series that's coming up that anyone can get access to. And if you're involved in tech translation of any sort, it'd probably be good to tune in. And also love to know a little bit more about how you guys have responded. But I think you actually have a few slides for us, so I'd love to welcome you.
Yeah, I do. So let me try to share that with all.
I can't share it. Is it disabled? Sorry. Let's try that. There you go. How's that?
Excellent. Okay. Oops. Beginning. All right, are we seeing my screen?
Yeah, you're just fine there.
Okay, excellent. So as Jean mentioned, I'm Michelle Larkin. I'm the Director of Commercialization Programs at Fast Forward Medical Innovation at the University of Michigan Medical School. And I'm going to take us upstream of anything that Gary would deal with to technology that's still being developed and translated at our universities and health systems within the state of Michigan. So just as a brief overview of what Fast Forward Medical Innovation is. So we're a support unit within the University of Michigan Medical School Office of Research that was started 6 or 7 years ago now to help catalyze and translate research out of our university. And then more recently, in the past couple of years, help share these educational and funding opportunities with with the state at other institutions to help really spur translation of life science technologies within our state out into the ecosystem. So FFMI has 3 main goals or 3 main areas that we offer to the community and to our universities and health systems. I myself obviously oversee the funding and mentorship side of the house. So funding and other opportunities that we have that help support the translation of these technologies. I'll tell you about one just in case it's relevant to you. We have an internal business development team that helps our investigators connect better with industry partners to facilitate, efficient transfer of technology in that fashion. And then I'm here today to tell you about an educational opportunity that we're offering that may be of interest to you regarding technology translation in the life sciences. And then, as I mentioned, all of these services are available here on our own campus as well as at other institutions and health systems around the state.
I should just say interrupt there one thing, Michelle. I mean, I think it's really important for our audience to know it's kind of rare for a university to be offering something outside of its own walls, but a lot of the things you're talking about have access, at least learning access outside, which I think is just kind of incredible. So just want to make sure our audience is aware.
Yeah, we're very fortunate here to be FFMI to be supported by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is obviously a statewide supporter of many types of programs in the translational sciences for some of our funding programs. And then we are also supported in part by the Economic Development Association to help, disseminate a lot of the things that we have across the state and the region as well. And so that's been a very important impetus for us in the past several years to make sure that we're not solely helping our own, but helping the rest of the ecosystem as well, which I think is very characteristic of Michigan and the Midwest in general, in terms of, I think the ecosystem here is very strong, especially with what you're building now with this webinar. So yeah, we're all in this together. And as I mentioned, we do have some money from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. As a big asterisk, this money is available for investigators whose technologies are still being developed at academic and health systems within the state of Michigan. So if that's not you, please disregard. But if that is you, or you're working with investigators at any of these institutions, there is money available to help develop further prototyping and other regulatory business type activities towards getting these out into the commercial marketplace. And if you have questions about these, please feel free to reach out to me, or if you have an idea, I'm happy to talk to you about it and your potential eligibility for this program. And Gene is generously on our oversight committee for this, and so he's been a great supporter in helping these technologies move forward as well. So just maybe to start, I wanted to talk a little bit about just briefly the University of Michigan's response to the COVID crisis, and then a couple of things that we've done here, specifically at Fast Forward Medical Innovation. But as a university as a whole has really come together across campus to kind of centralize and document all of the ways that our researchers here have pivoted their current research trajectories towards solving or helping to alleviate the COVID pandemic. And if you're interested in that, there's an entire research index of all of the ongoing research projects that are happening on our campus. The link is here on the screen. And this certainly isn't all of them. This is all that's publicly available, which on the website currently is 285 different research projects in these categories. I've highlighted a few here, just saying there are over 40 diagnostics and new therapies being studied here on campus, as well as at least 14 different medical devices in development that are, geared towards solving this crisis. So it's been a really robust response on our campus and people pivoting their research to, address this issue here locally and, across the state and the country as well.
That's a really neat index, Michelle. I hadn't known about that. I'm glad you brought that up. I just did a quick search here. You can just research.umich.edu and then follow the COVID-19 links and you'll find that. I remember during the height of the pandemic, there was so much organic stuff going on, and I wasn't aware that the university actually went out there and said, okay, let's catalog it and let's make an index. That's really cool.
Yeah, so all of this is publicly available, and then there's obviously a wealth of more that's not, but if you have interest in what's going on at the university, this is a great place to figure out what we're up to and how we're helping address this problem. And then more specifically on the Fast Forward Medical Innovation side, so we are the grateful benefactors of a large gift to the university from the Stuart and Maxine Frankel Foundation, which at its core was really to catalyze transformative research that would save a lot of people's lives. And this obviously comes at no better time given that we're all dealing with such a transformative problem. And so we just closed our application cycle for this program, which was available only on our campus, but we've had several applicants that are, obviously transitioning their research towards COVID applications. And so we're really looking forward to see how that plays out and how this could potentially be a good source of capital to accelerate some of these technologies that are trying to address this crisis. And then I want to give a shout out to my Fast Forward Medical Innovation business development colleagues. So this has been something they have been working on, over the past, year or so, but the transition from all in person to virtually run clinical trials. And they had a couple in the pipeline, but have really paved the way for how we can implement these types of trials on our campus and provide a framework for how we can deliver care and deliver new technology to patients without having to be in person or to be socially distant and mindful of all of the things that go into, keeping, now that we've flattened the curve, keep that at bay. And so that's been a really interesting and impactful development here on campus. And I've linked to the article here if you want to read more, but one of the cool things is that they're running now a large drug clinical trial completely virtually, which is one of the first opportunities to do that. So I think that's really encouraging, especially for all of our patients that are missing out on a lot of the care and the opportunity that they currently have, or that they used to have, that they don't currently have access to. And so I think it's a timely transition for virtual clinical trials. And then what I'm mainly here to talk to you about today, and what has been really interesting, is that a lot of our researchers on campus have pivoted their ongoing research, if they can, to COVID-related research. But if they can't, or if their labs were closed and they're trying to figure out how to best utilize their time, we've had a lot of, a giant increase in inbound interest in innovative ideas that they've had on the back burner for a long time that they're finally resurfacing and paying some more attention to. And so
you're actually seeing an uptick in people who are saying, this isn't COVID related, but I've been thinking about this, and now that I got some time, I want to come talk to FFMI about it.
Yeah, it's been really fun. And I think it's just, a lot of, and everybody gets distracted, and in their daily lives, and they've had this idea for a long time and they didn't know how to take the first step. And that's obviously why we're here, is to help you to do that. But now that they have some extra bandwidth to think about that, we've had a lot of inbound interest. And so we thought, how do we address all of these innovators that are popping up everywhere? And so FFMI has created this series of webinars, which is essentially like a translational research and commercialization 101 for all of our new innovators and old innovators that have popped up that may want a refresher on some of the things that they've learned over the past several years. And so we're offering this is free and open to the public. So all of you on the call, if you're willing to attend or share this with somebody you think might be interested. But we're offering this series of 7 webinars geared towards the novice innovator in the life sciences, focusing on why do we innovate? Why is commercializing your research important? And what are the critical milestones that you have to focus on technologically, but also on the non-technical side to get these technologies through to the marketplace? How do we think about the regulatory environment, especially now, and how does that impact our development process? And are there, new and novel ways to engage with the industry to move these technologies forward? And where do you find money to do these activities, and what types of opportunities do you have to tap into? And so it's meant to be kind of an A to Z. If I have an idea, why should I pursue it? How do I do it? It's a list of the upcoming webinars. So this is the series of 7. It starts next Wednesday at 2 p.m. And then on this previous slide, there's a link to all of the webinars. Each one has a brief overview of what's going to be covered, who the speakers are. They're going to be every other week throughout the summer. So if you're interested and want to attend, I'll also just point out that the 3 webinars related to therapeutics, digital health, and medical devices are going to include case studies from investigators on our campus that have taken their idea all the way through to the point at which they're forming a company or partnering with industry to take these technologies out. And so I think it's a great opportunity to hear from somebody who's done this, at the academic level, who's not a business person, and have them explain how they move these technologies forward and how they've learned, and what resources they've tapped into, what expertise they've tapped into. And I think it'll give a great sense of how they utilize the network that we've built here in Michigan to really move these technologies forward.
That's really neat. And I was looking at some of the descriptions of those, Michelle, and it looked like, it's amazing to have, universities talking about things like talking to your users and things like that. And I just thought, that goes all the way to clearance and beyond, right? For a medical device, is that, and FDA is all concerned about usability and things like that. And you guys are talking about this, so kudos for talking about that at this kind of an early stage. And it seems like from an audience perspective, it's not only really the researchers who are thinking about getting into innovation. That would be from any research institution in the state, or actually, I guess beyond even. Not that FFMI can necessarily help out-of-state companies, but they can certainly learn from this. But also, we know a lot of startups that think about going in and taking research out of the university and making a startup around it. This would be a good connection point for that as well, from what I can tell.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good insight into how we're really trying to develop these technologies and de-risk them as much as we can, using all the resources and funding that we have available on campus to really make them truly ready assets to be taken out of the university. These aren't a lot of the work that we're doing now with some of the funding from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation is taking these technologies to a point where you used to only be able to get that far if you had an SBIR or STTR in hand and had that company formed already. And so we're really moving these a lot further than we used to, which I think is really fantastic. And so it's a good opportunity to see what we're doing here how far we're taking these innovations on campus, and that they're really ready for you if you're interested in taking them out and pursuing them further.
That is really cool. Well, we appreciate your being here, Michelle, to talk about this with us. We do have one question from user R. Krantz. I don't have a first name here, but I'm going to make your line live if you just unmute. There was a quick question for Michelle here.
Hi, Michelle. This is Renee Krantz. That's my name. Hi, everybody. I have so many questions and so many thoughts going through my mind, so I hope I don't jumble everything up. I'm actually an ex-Johnson & Johnson employee, so I'm very attuned with research. So I recently went to SEMI, which is a trade association, which I've never been part of, but since I am, I'm now head of the R&D programs. And we have funded over $50 million to research communities. And you know, I always tell my boss, this is the best kept secret in the industry. So when you were talking about all the innovations and the research that you're doing, it really hit me like, well, why aren't we working together? I'm specifically responsible for smart MedTech R&D. So we're working with many different universities. We're working with Cornell. We're working with UCLA. We're working with Harvard. And we're also working with industry, trying to join and collaborate universities with the industry so you can get an insight to the whole supply chain ecosystem. So I thought a lot of your research areas are exactly what we're working on, like sweat assays for Air Force pilots, you know, wearing monitors, using microneedles that they can actually be injected with a medicine, say their eyes dry out, say their glucose goes crazy, say they're dehydrated, all types of different things. And I thought I'd just bring that up, you know, just to make folks aware that we do funding from the government, taxpayer dollars at work. And I just wanted to throw that out there. So you know there is something, you know, out there to help you and forward this whole medical mess that we're in right now.
Well, I appreciate that, Renee. I don't know if you've been working with SEMI, but I'm sure we could make the connection there. It's kind of what we call this thing crossroads. We're trying to get people to bump into each other. So that's a cool thing. I don't know.
There's so much going on in you know, how do you know who's doing what and where's the right connection points?
Yeah, no, I appreciate your reaching out, Renee. I don't know if you have any immediate comments, Michelle, and also Renee. I don't know if you can type in if you're willing. Actually, I can just share your contact information from the registration with Michelle if that's of interest to you both.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I would really be interested in a follow-up conversation about how, you know, the potential opportunities that you have in, I mean, the wealth of research that we have on campus and how we could potentially partner. So that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I love it. I love these connections. This is what makes my day.
Isn't that great?
That's great. Well, Renee, thank you for being here, and thanks for reaching out. We'll make the connection there between you and Michelle and get you guys in contact. And it's good. We can follow up afterwards too, and maybe there's more that SEMI would like to let our audience know about at a different time too.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Renee, for being with us. Okay, and Michelle, I just noticed you had one more slide up. Is there anything more you want to say about your last slide there?
Oh, just keep in touch with us. This is our website. We have a once-a-month newsletter, so any events or funding opportunities that may be relevant to you will pop in your inbox. Only once a month, we don't spam. And so if you're interested in learning about more opportunities like this, please sign up. Just go to our main webpage and there's sign up for the newsletter.
That is awesome.
Thanks.
Well, we really appreciate having you with us today, and hope everyone will try to tune into those webinars starting next Wednesday, June 17th, if I have that right, at 2 p.m.
Correct.
Every Wednesday for a little while. So we say a dozen of them?
There's 7 that go
7,
through,
okay.
I think, early September. So
That's great. That gets all the way through the summer. So
yes.
we appreciate that greatly. Thanks again for being with us, Michelle.
Thanks, Jean. Appreciate it.
We'll talk soon. Great. I want to bring just one more person on. our friend Olaf, who just asked a question earlier, did note that there is another ventilator that he's aware of. And in the spirit of keeping the community connected here, I want to find Olaf's login here and allow him to just tell us for 30 seconds about what he is aware of with this another ventilator company. Olaf, I think you're live.
Yeah, hi, Gene. Yes, actually, a colleague of mine from Procter & Gamble in the past, who had retired several years ago, he founded this company called Venti Now. So Venti as in ventilator now, NOW, and it's at the website venti-now.org. And he consulted or asked the University Hospital in Cincinnati, he asked the Children's Hospital and others, like what would a good low-cost ventilator have to do? And he then pulled together several other people from different organizations and resources, mostly retired people also. And they have built this now and just received this week the emergency use authorization from the FDA. And they say, or he says that it's built at a fraction of the cost of normal ventilators because it uses generally available parts. Obviously, they are in a state that it's clean and meeting medical applications, providing that clean air. And the intention is that to help provide access to this to the communities, or especially also device building companies, if they're interested in making this. And they provide a license at really low cost because all they really want to do is cover the development cost that he had paid out of pocket and a little bit of administrative cost. So it should be a really low cost option available for companies who are interested in building such a very, well, cheap always has a bad connotation, a low cost ventilator. Again, I would recommend for people to go to that website if they're interested.
Can you plug that one in? Yeah, plug that into the chat. That would be great if you would, and we can get that circulated to people if they have any interest in that.
Okay. Yep.
No, appreciate it all. Appreciate all your participation too. You've been a great contributor and lots of great questions as well. So thank you for that. We appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I really appreciate that. The questions, the great interactions today. I want to let you know, we had such a good conversation today. We're not going to touch on it due to interests of time today, but next week, among other things, we're going to cover a guidance from FDA. This one dates from 2016, but it's really, really fascinating. I will just bring it on the screen here really quickly so that you have a sense. Among other things, we're going to be talking about factors to consider regarding benefit risk in medical device product availability, compliance, and enforcement decisions. What do you know? That's exactly what FDA has been doing for the last 3 months. And they actually had the outline, they actually had the guidance in place. This is not so much focused on new product clearances. It's more about what if this device isn't compliant with all of our regulations? Would we still allow it? And so as we go through that, we'll probably spend maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes a week for the next probably 2 weeks touching on this guidance document, because I think what you're going to see is how this really provided a playbook for FDA in the EUAs for the medical devices that we saw coming out. And if you understand that philosophy, that framework, you're also going to be a lot closer to understanding FDA's heart in the matter of their submissions and their submission reviews, because it's all about benefit to the patient versus risk to the patient. That's really where all this stuff comes down. So getting into that, we'll touch on that next week as well. I do want to leave just 1 minute in case there are any general Q&A out there. Feel free to raise your hand if you have any general Q&A. Maybe it's on EUAs, maybe it's on 510Ks, maybe it's on anything that we've covered in a previous show, including the COVID Connect shows. Love to have your questions if there are any. We'll just wait 1 second for any attendees to raise their hands. I'm just looking here, not seeing any. So with that, everybody, I want to thank Michelle and Gary for their time today, for all your participation. We greatly enjoyed that, and we are going to look forward to being with you next Friday at 2 p.m. for the next MedTech Crossroads. Thanks for being with us today, everybody.